Now, so we are now being recorded, and this is a special webinar for our sustaining and founding members, presented by Rabbi Avi Fertig, who's with us from Israel, where it's, I guess, about 7 p.m. there. So welcome.
Welcome to everybody, and thank you, Jeff, for the technical assistance and for everything else. Thank you to the founding members. This is our little show of gratitude for the incredible effort, both financially and in looking at the list. I know that it's not just financial; it's everything that you do to keep the Mussar Institute going forward, and we very much appreciate that. And this is our little way of saying thank you. It's really nice. Good morning for some of you. It's good afternoon for some of you. And for me, it's good evening. I assume I'm the only one where it's the evening, but I might be wrong about that. I'm not sure of the time. This is an interesting topic to discuss, equanimity, and I'm sure that you all have experienced with, as time goes on and technology increases, that it seems the more devices that we have that are designed to allow us time for calmness and for rest, actually seem to do the opposite. And what I'd like to do for the next 45 minutes or so is really just give you some food for thought and reflection, open up some of the issues that really can only find any resolution through your own experience with working through the midot that we'll discuss, and your own experience of Shabbat, however that may be. Just an interesting little aside. My last two children were born on Shabbat, which always presents all kinds of interesting questions and difficulties, going to the hospital on Shabbat and etc. But my fourth child, who was a girl, we hadn't picked a name, and we were really deciding between two names. One of them was Menucha, which is what we'll discuss tonight, and the other one was Michal. In the end, I chose to call her Michal. In retrospect, that might have been a mistake because she cried for the first year of her life. And Menucha, which means calmness or rest, perhaps would have been the smarter choice. There's a story that's told from the Alter of Shabbat, the Alter of Kelm, or Simcha Zissel, one of the primary students of Bitachon-Trust. His daughter fell ill, and the doctor or the professor, as it says, some versions, the professor that he was in contact with told him that it was very important for his daughter to be in a state of equanimity as much as possible. A spiritual type of rest is what was needed. And the way the story is told, the Alter of Kelm asked the doctor, so how does one do that? And the way the story comes through to us is that we do have in the words of Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz, we have a diet. We have a certain program for reaching Menuchat HaNefesh, which we'll discuss tonight. And aside to that story is perhaps showing the great Menuchat HaNefesh of the family. That child wound up passing away, and the Alter's wife, one of her jobs, so to speak, was to collect charity at various funerals. And it's said that at the funeral of her own child who had passed away, she did not desist from her job, and she went around in her grief collecting charity for the poor. When asked, she said that just because I am in pain and suffering, that doesn't mean that the poor people of the community should suffer. Incredible show of the ability to act in the face of suffering. The very theme of Shabbat, and some of you I know have been getting emails and are involved in a program that revolves around Shabbat, the Midot of Shabbat. But the very theme of Shabbat seems to be Menucha. Menucha meaning rest, or a certain type of rest, calmness. One of the prayers that we have that's traditionally said at the time of Mincha on Shabbat says like this: You are one, and your name is one. Who is like your people Israel, a unique nation on earth? And now we praise the day, a day of Menucha and Kedusha. And those are two concepts that we will discuss. Menucha and Kedusha. Have you given your people? A Menucha of love and giving. A Menucha of truth and faith. A Menucha of peace and tranquility and of serenity and security. A complete Menucha. So that's the way that the Shabbat day is described. You say that among great people, the reality was visible on their faces. Rabbi Avi, one of the great Mussar masters of pre-war Europe who came to Israel, he told of his Rebbe, the Alter of Tema we just spoke about, looked pale as a corpse during the week, but on Shabbos, his cheeks shined a rosy red. It's also told that there was a new student that visited or came to study at the Mir Yeshiva, where Rabbi Yerucham Levavitz was a mashgiach, the spiritual mentor, and after being in the yeshiva for a few months, he remarked to one of the students, he was surprised to see that the yeshiva employed a different mashgiach for Shabbat than during the week. Whereupon the student said, I don't know what you're talking about, it's the same mashgiach. But apparently, the appearance of Rabbi Yerucham was so different on Shabbat that he looked like a different person. So that's a great level for us to aspire to. But let's try to understand what some of the issues revolving around attaining Menuchat HaNefesh, equanimity are, and then see perhaps a little bit how the Shabbat experience is meant to allow us to achieve this equanimity that we seek. We all know, looking at the list of participants, all of you are well versed with Mussar, and comes as no surprise to you that challenges and life tests in Mussar perspective are our purpose in life. Challenges are how we grow our spiritual selves, and they're nothing to avoid, and they're part of a spiritually centered life. If we take a look at the first slide, everybody can see the slides up there, and I do think that it's a good idea, like Jeff said, to try to make me a little larger because the slides take up a lot of the screen. It's not necessary. But take a look. I want to just present to you a number of questions. We'll deal with 3 questions. We'll call them questions. They're not really questions, but they're points of tension that need to be addressed. So the first one is like this. Take a look at this line. The Self-Salanter said, as long as one lives a life of calmness and tranquility in the service of God, it is clear that he is remote from true service. You might be familiar with that quote because it's in Alan's book, Everyday Holiness, and that's the next quote. Alan said, in the Jewish view, and I love this quote, the goal of spiritual life is not, isn't it nice that I'm quoting Alan as one of the great masters of Mussar? In the Jewish view, the goal of spiritual life is not to reach an enlightened state in which all the questions and conundrums of life are unknotted with finality, but rather to become much more skilled in the process of living. Those are two quotes that we know very well, and as much as we try to avoid life's challenges, it's impossible. And even if it were possible, it doesn't seem to be what is required of us. On the other hand, versus, we have a quote here from Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, the goal of personal spiritual work is Menuchat HaNefesh. Menuchat HaNefesh means calmness of the soul. So, how are we to put these two things together? Now, Alan deals with this in the book, and we won't say something totally different. On the other hand, we're going to approach it a little bit differently, through the eyes of Shabbat. Okay, that's our first basic question. We have life's challenges, vicissitudes on the one hand versus Rav Shlomo Wolbe telling us that the goal of personal spiritual work is Menuchat HaNefesh. We're going to have to see why those two things are not in conflict. Second slide. Passions, desires, lusts. Certainly for me, I know that they are a tremendous, we'll call that challenge to my calmness and my equanimity. Take a look at these four quotes. And this is being recorded, and number one is being recorded. Number two, anybody who wants the slides, I'll be happy to send them to you in an email. It's just a PowerPoint that I just prepared a few hours ago. One who has 100 wants 200, one who has 200 wants 400. We all know that we're all familiar with this. When it comes to money, the more you have, the more you want. Always an incredible thing to see, these CEOs who are worth 100 million and more, who are still getting up at 5 a.m., putting in a full day, making more money and more money than they can ever spend. Another quote, a person does not leave this world with even half his desires fulfilled. Third quote, there is a small appendage in man. When it's satiated, it's hungry, and when it's hungry, it's satiated. I hope there's no snickering over that one. But that's what it says in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Talmud tells us that referring to the sexual organ, why it's called a small appendage, it's not for now. But the point is that the more we feed our lusts, the more we desire. And it seems from this quote that the way in which to minimize our desire is to refrain, to sustain. Finally, the last quote comes from Isaiah, and the wicked are like the driven sea that cannot attain silence, and whose waters disgorge mire and mud. There is no peace, said my God, for the wicked. And that's a quote that I want you to see how it equates wickedness with a lack of equanimity, a lack of calmness. Okay, next slide, verses. Take a look at these quotes. We have a verse in Isaiah that says, Shabbat is called Oneg. Oneg means pleasure. The specific flavor of pleasure that Oneg refers to is personal pleasure. In other words, there are certain pleasures that are considered universal. Oneg is the things that you like. And that's why when it comes to a Shabbos feast, even though it is generally assumed that people prefer meat over dairy, if one prefers dairy, that's what he should have. If a person prefers fish over beef, that's what they should have. Because the whole idea of pleasure on Shabbos is what you like. Another quote. All worldly pleasures were created for Shabbat. Finally, Reb Zera witnessed two Torah scholars debating a Torah portion and said to them, go and involve yourselves with the pleasures of Shabbat. So here we find that even the great mitzvah of Torah study is banished when it comes to having, quote, the pleasures of Shabbat. And that requires some thought. Why would it be that on the one hand, we find that our desires and running after indulging our pleasure, indulging our lusts, indulging our passions seems to be a source, and you can argue with me that maybe that's not a source of lack of equanimity, but I know in my own life, that's certainly been a tremendous state of lack of equanimity. Now, those who smoke cigarettes, it doesn't seem to create equanimity. Those who need to have whatever it is they need to have. And as we indulge, it becomes a need. We lose the flavor. We even lose the pleasure involved in the experience just that we need to have it again and again. So how are we to understand this focus and this emphasis on pleasure, indulging in pleasure on Shabbat? There's even a mitzvah to take a nap in the afternoon on Shabbat. Many have that custom, afternoon rest. There's a special concept of marital relations on Shabbat without going into details, but one is meant to not only connect to his wife, but to indulge in physical pleasure, or husband. So what's that about? And how are we to understand how that goes into creating the equanimity that Shabbat is meant to do? Okay. Next, I hope I haven't lost you yet. In a couple of minutes, 2 minutes, give me one more question work, the question number 3 here, and then I'll give you a few minutes to rest and perhaps ask some questions. Okay, the third question, a little bit deeper. Rabbi Wolbe says, take a look at the slide. Rabbi Wolbe says that we attain menuchat hanefesh by creating a border where foreign influences cannot penetrate. Just to flesh that out a little bit, what he means by a border is that you don't let foreign influences in to disturb you, and you get more in touch with that which is within you. 39 restrictions of Shabbat. How do restrictions create menuchat hanefesh? We're all familiar that on Shabbat, there are in the Torah many, many restrictions. You can't do this, you can't do that. There's even a restriction that many don't know about because there's a way around it. But in Torah law, there's a restriction to carry things in from a private domain to a public domain. You're not supposed to carry. You're not supposed to do any type of commerce, and you're not supposed to even carry. There are ways around that today that we sort of fallen by the wayside. But how does all these restrictions of Shabbat create this menuchat hanefesh? Versus these two quotes. Whoever indulges in pleasure on Shabbat is given boundless or limitless heritage. Just the words that I underlined here create a certain contrast, a certain tension, certain contradiction. Rabbi Wolbe tells us that Menuchat HaNefesh is creating borders, and we have here the Talmud telling us that if you indulge in the pleasure of Shabbat, you're given boundless heritage. Boundless, what's the idea here? And I know that I'm kind of confusing you now, and sounds a little bit up there philosophical. We'll try to get down to the practical and see how some of this plays out. The second quote, similar, he who indulges on Shabbat is granted his heart's desires. Again, similar contrast. You see from the words here in the Talmud that there's this sort of boundless, limitless heart desires feeling that we're supposed to attain and supposed to accomplish on Shabbat. But Rabbi Wolbe tells us that Menuchat HaNefesh is created through borders and 39 restrictions. So how does that work out? Okay. So I would like you to we can chat in now, and if there's a question, just a clarification question, but I don't want answers now. We're not getting answers, and maybe the whole evening or morning, whatever you are in, whatever time zone, we're not going to necessarily get to the answers. But let's just take a minute or two. I don't know if Jeff, if they can move the slides on their own. I think they might not be able to, but just take a look at them for another minute. There's our first question regarding the general life tests versus the goal of spiritual work. The second question is desires, passions, lusts, money. Which seems to be something that disturbs our equanimity, versus Shabbos is called oneg, pleasure, all about pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. And finally, the third question or contradiction of sorts, this creating the Menuchat HaNefesh with borders, and versus whoever indulges in pleasure on Shabbos is given boundless, limited heart's desires. These words seem to be somewhat contradictory, these concepts, and how do we put them together? Good. Okay, so I'd like you to think about for a minute what disturbs your equanimity. What are the things that really disturb your inner calmness, your inner tranquility? I know by me, this is a small list. There may be others. And we're going to try to see now how some of these issues are through the diet of Shabbat. As Rabbi Rucham called it, are dealt with. Desires, passions, lusts, worry, fear, jealousy, desire for honor and respect. Those are a small list, and I'm sure each of you, and I encourage you to consider what disturbs your equanimity. And let's see how some of the ideas that Shabbat is meant to deal with. Okay, the first midah of Shabbat is Bitachon. Now we're going to discuss only two midot. I'll give you the heads up right now. We're going to discuss Bitachon and we're going to discuss Kedusha. And I'm not going to define Kedusha yet. We'll leave that for a second. But the first of the midot that we will discuss is Bitachon. Back to me now. Let's not focus too much on the slide. The Torah tells us that on the seventh day, God completed the work that he had done, and he abstained on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. The commentaries point out that this seems to be a contradiction, because on the one hand it says that God completed his work on the seventh day, and then the verse continues and says that he abstained from work on the seventh day. So which one was it? Did he complete it on the seventh, or did he complete it before the seventh and do nothing on the seventh? So there's a very interesting Rashi. Rashi comments based on a medrash. What did the world lack? Menucha, rest. Shabbos came and rest came. The work of creation was then finished and complete. Which means that there was one final aspect of creation, of the creative process, that was not complete, and that was the creation of Menucha, the creation of rest. In other words, God created God created the concept of rest, which we'll have to understand. I went around the table, on my Shabbos table this week, and I asked my children, how do they experience Menucha, rest on Shabbos? So of course, the popular answer was, no school. Is that what it's all about? Certainly, going to work on Shabbat would fly in the face of rest. However, maybe there's something deeper. This is the source of Shabbat blessing. As we say, God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, for on that day he abstained from all his work that he had created. So on one level, when we abstain from work on Shabbat, we are attesting to God's mastery over creation. And that's where the Midat Bitachon comes. Because a proper worldview is that while we make human effort, and that's why for 6 days we have to work, on the seventh day, on Shabbat, we have to come back to the realization that it's really God, Hashem, that is allowing us to succeed. So certainly, from the mind, that is the first step in achieving or realizing this Menucha. As a matter of fact, the very definition of work on Shabbat has nothing to do with how hard it is physically, but it has to do with how creative the act is, without going into the specifics. Because when we desist from creative activity, what we're saying is, I realize you, God, are really the one who is in control. But how do we experience this rest? How do we experience it? So there's another verse. This verse is from Shemot 28. And it says, remember the day of Shabbat to sanctify it. 6 days you shall work and accomplish all of your work. But the seventh day is set aside for Shabbat to Hashem. Here, we have a very interesting comment by the Torah. That we have to look at all of our work as complete. Now, how do we do that? I know that in my business, and I'm sure it's no different in yours, that there's no way that after 6 days, all of our projects are complete. you're in the middle of 5 or 6 or 10 different projects. And comes Shabbat, and we're supposed to look at it as all of our work is complete. What does that mean? So this is really something that you need to work at. And it doesn't come easily. You know, the example I always like to give is when you're on vacation and you're sitting at the ocean, you know, it's a beautiful 80 degrees, sunny, and all you can see is the beautiful expanse of the ocean, and you're sitting there, and there's a light breeze, and you're sipping your martini or your pina colada, but you're thinking, everything is perfect, but you're thinking about work, or you're thinking about something you did wrong. So all of that external beauty and external perfection, you're not going to be able to appreciate. It's similar here. Shabbat is a time using the midah bitachon to say to yourself that I did everything that I can. And in that sense, your work is complete. If you did your work as you should have, the 6 days preceding Shabbat, it's a time to come back to the realization that, what am I? How much can I really accomplish? How much can I really effect in the world? As hard as I work, and as much as I do to accomplish, I realize, I come back to the realization that it's really in God's hands. So if a person is able to appreciate that, again, first in the mind, that as much as I have to do and put in my effort during the 6 days of the week, when I realize, when I'm able to conceptualize the idea that it's really out of my hands, that I really have to rely on Hashem for everything, in that sense your work really is complete. It's a time to sit back, appreciate, and of course this requires 6 days of work preceding it. As I think I've mentioned many times that, and I have this with my students all the time, that you can't have Shabbat 7 days a week. Whenever the Torah introduces Shabbat, it always precedes it by saying, for 6 days you shall work, and on the 7th day you shall rest. Shabbat is only possible if you put in 6 days of work. When you put in 6 days of hard work, you can feel on the 7th day accomplished. You can feel that I put in my effort, and now I come back to the realization that you, God, are really in control. Shabbat revolves around peace, shalom. It revolves around family and friends. There's no greater time to experience the perfection than at a Shabbat meal with the Shabbat candles illuminating the room, the aroma of the delicious cuisine, friends, family, sitting together without distraction, everybody really being present in the moment. There's an idea of song, which we'll get back to at the end, which has become a little bit of a custom here in my webinars, that I always finish off with a tune. This is what Shabbat is meant to be. There's a certain peace that a person has to come with himself. That's that inner balance that we'll talk about more as we go. With your surroundings, with your life tests, when you realize that there's only so much that's in your control, you put in the effort, now is the time to appreciate with bitachon that it's not in your control, that there are many things that are out of your control. And finally, with God, that you appreciate on Shabbat that you're in God's loving hands and that He wants the best for you. Take a look at this famous quote from the Chovot HaLevavot, where he says the essence of Bitachon is the Menuchat HaNefesh, calmness of the soul, of the faithful one, whose heart trusts that the one in whom he places his trust will do what's good and right. This is the first midah that is front and center in the Shabbat experience that a person must call upon to experience the rest that Shabbat is meant to give us. Let's move on to the second midah. The second midah is Kedusha. Now, I've defined Kedusha as sanctity, not as holiness. I'm not really sure what holiness means, but sanctity, I think I have a pretty good idea about. So let's discuss what I think Kedusha is about. Sanctity. We say in the morning prayer on Shabbat, and in your menucha the uncircumcised cannot dwell. Now, the uncircumcised is a reference, the commentaries tell us, to somebody who has uncontrolled passions. As we said, uncontrolled passions certainly do not allow a person to have menuchat hanefesh. But when we come to Shabbat, we said that it's all about pleasure, indulging in pleasure. But here's the idea. Kedusha, sanctity, means not that you just indulge for the sake of indulgence, without any borders, without any restrictions, but rather a person elevates his most basic drives by sanctifying them, by being purposeful, by being fully present. Not just indulging and this and that and this and that, but to sanctify them. There's a very, very nice custom that even when eating, a person says before they put the food in the mouth that I'm doing this for the honor of Shabbos. And great people have seen this. Before they eat, they say L'Koved Shabbos, for the honor of Shabbos. Somebody once went to Shlomo Wolbe's house, who we've quoted, and if you're from the Mussar Institute, it's impossible for you not to be familiar with that name. Went for a Shabbos meal. He was a guest at Rabbi Wolbe's house. So they asked him, okay, so tell me something about what that was like. So he said, I'll tell you. For dessert, his wife served ice cream. So Rabbi Wolbe got the ice cream, he picked up the dish, he looked at it, he inhaled the aroma, even though ice cream doesn't seem to have that much of aroma, but there's a certain sweetness to the aroma. He put it back down, and then he ate it. That was what he said over. The idea of menucha, and this is a challenge that we have in so many areas. And those of you who know me know that I constantly struggle with my relationship with my teenage children. The idea is not to desist. Menucha does not mean to desist from living life. It doesn't mean to desist from meeting our challenges or indulging in our pleasures. But it does mean to sanctify them. It means not to be numb, but to be fully present and engaged. And that's what the Shabbat experience is, again, designed for. It is not a question of simple indulgence, but it is indulgence with a purpose and a sanctity whereby we elevate our strongest passions and desires. Now, one could perhaps ask, why not do this all week? And there is a concept, of course, of remembering the Shabbat throughout the week. But apparently, it's impossible for us to be on such a level where we can live like this all 7 days. For 6 days, there is a concept, certainly in the Mussar literature, of desisting, from our pleasures, not indulging too much, as a training for the proper perspective to approach the Shabbat experience, where the Mesilat Yesharim tells us there's no pre-shoot on Shabbat. Pre-shoot means to abstain, to live a life of asceticism. That's not the way. That's not only not the goal on Shabbat, but it might even be prohibited. On Shabbat, one is meant to indulge, but only within the proper context of sanctity. And when one can do that, one can experience true Menuchat HaNefesh. So Menuchat HaNefesh seems to be not simply a numbness or a desisting or a apathy of sorts, but it really means to have the soul and the body in perfect balance, and that is achieved through sanctity. Take a look at the slide. The concept of Kedusha is that a person creates such a deep and constant attachment to God so that every action is connected to Him to the point where the person elevates everything physical. And so every action, even the most lowly and physical, will be as sacrifices and divine service. Such a person is considered a mikdash, tabernacle, or ultimately the holy temple in Jerusalem, like an altar. The Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests on such a person just as it rested in the mikdash. That's what the Mesilas Yesharim tells us. The path of the just, or by Chaim Moshe Luzzatto, in defining what Kedusha is. So Kedusha is not, the ultimate level of Kedusha, of holiness, is not to desist. It is not to live a life of asceticism. It's not a life of removing yourself from life's tests nor life's pleasures. But it necessitates that a person approach those pleasures, approach food and marital relations and rest to sanctify them. Okay, let's take a look at some more. Let's see. Well, here's the slide that I think summarizes what we're talking about. And that is that Bitachon and Kedusha are the primary midot of Shabbat, which ultimately create Menuchat HaNefesh. And I would like you all to go over some of the questions that we considered at the beginning of tonight or this afternoon and see how they fit into these two midot and how working on these two midot could in some way bring a resolution of sorts to the questions we raised and ultimately lead to Menuchat HaNefesh. And of course, that it's only through your own Shabbat experience, working with those midot, and really taking the ideas and using them to fully experience a proper Shabbat, that one can really ever understand on any level the resolution to those questions that we started with. Okay. So as a little bit of a summary and a little bit of, when I say practice, I mean practical. Let's take a look at some practical measures. Number one, preparation. It's very important in all of the Mussar literature. It talks very often about, in order for something to be meaningful, you need to prepare. You can't just expect to, slide into a situation and have it be meaningful. And that's true with Shabbat. There's so many things that in the traditional Shabbat experience one must prepare before Shabbat, and therefore it sort of forces the issue. But in as much as a person, for example, I can't stress this enough, the more one prepares, the more one can really enter within the sanctity and the menucha, the spiritual rest that Shabbos is meant to provide. That's why it's so important, not only to bathe and to dress in nice clothing. All that really does help. And again, if you haven't experienced it, then it's hard to talk about. But and that goes to the sanctity as well, preparing by having a delicious meal and having everything done beforehand. I know when we have guests, which is quite often, it's a different experience on Shabbat than it is when it's not Shabbat, because when it's not Shabbat, inevitably you leave a lot of things to be done during the meal, during the time when your guests are here, and that changes it. I'm worried already for Purim is coming in a few weeks, and we're having like 30 guests, or I don't know, like something like that, 20 or 30 guests, and my wife is expecting. She's already in her pretty far along in her pregnancy, and she's 40 years old, and I'm a little bit worried, and so is she. How much of a Purim will she have with all these guests? Well, that's a topic for another webinar, but certainly on Shabbat, preparing is very important. Speech has to be different on Shabbat. That means, number one, we don't talk about business, and that we thought about that before you're indulging, you actually say the words, I am doing this for the honor of Shabbos. I am doing this to appreciate what God has given me. How important it is to make a blessing, to make Kiddush on Shabbat. What's that all about? It's about evoking these midot through speech. Menucha, which comes through Bitachon-Trust, a proper worldview, and Kedusha-Sanctity. Prayer, meditation, all about being present, realizing, coming back to the realization that there's so many things that are not in my control. Coming back to the realization that for 6 days I worked, I tried, I did everything I could, but today is a day where I just appreciate that God is in control. I appreciate that God has my best interests. Prayer and meditation are essential for Shabbat experience. In the realm of thought, we discussed everything is complete. How do we attain that? It is a constant struggle. It is one of the most difficult things to do. I'm always amazed. I hear stories, you ever meet, I've had the pleasure of meeting people who are very wealthy, and who've made it themselves, not inherited the money, and worked their entire lives, very, very hard, with a lot of dedication. Maybe dedication is too soft a word, to make, hundreds of millions of dollars. And a lot of times you hear them, they say, well, it's all from God, it's all from God. And I always think to myself, come on, buddy, be serious. You woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning every day, you worked your tuchus off for 20 hours a day. And I know my own father, my father, when I was a kid, came home at 11 o'clock at night from work, sometimes midnight. He started his own business, and those are the hours he kept, So it's a little bit hard, you get this feeling like it's not genuine. You ask a person who's working 20 hours a day, and he says, yeah, it's all from God. Yeah, do you really believe that? I don't know. Okay, 6 days a week, maybe that's what God wants from you. But on Shabbos is a time, and this is a struggle. It doesn't just come like this. It's a real struggle. Shabbos is a time to come back to that realization is, yes, I make the effort, but I realize, God, that everything is complete now because it's really not in my hands. There's an idea of walking differently. I remember when I was in yeshiva, though, we tried this, and the Talmud says that a person shouldn't take a large step on Shabbos. I mean this literally. And the question is, how does one walk on Shabbos that it should be different? How does one walk on Shabbos that it's, that it shows there's a certain sanctity to the day? How do you walk with menuchat hanefesh? I don't know the answer to that, but I know that it's something that a person can try to do and find in his way, in his or her way, how can you make that relevant? It's a time to appreciate nature. The Song of Shabbos, which I don't have it quoted here, and I didn't write it down. I didn't get a chance. This was at the end, and I ran out of time when I was preparing. But if you look at the Song of Shabbos, Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos, which is in every Siddur, you'll find that it doesn't speak at all about Shabbos. What it does speak about is appreciating nature, the beauty of Hashem's world. And this is a time, Shabbos is the perfect time to take a walk and to appreciate the beautiful natural surroundings, the beautiful world that Hashem has created for us. That gives us a sense not only of Bitachon, but also of Kedusha. It gives us a sense that we realize that Hashem is looking out for our best interests. The next one is be fully present. It's a time to sit. The word Shabbat means to return, and it means to sit. By sitting, we mean it's not the time to do anything. The mitzvah of the day is not to do. The mitzvah of the day is to be present. Return in the sense of returning to within. And this goes back to what Rav Olby spoke about, that you create these borders. Menuchat HaNefesh essentially means that you are not externally with Menuchat HaNefesh. Menuchat HaNefesh is not through my interaction necessarily with the external world, but it is with my interaction to my own inner calmness. Again, this is a struggle, but this is what Shabbat is. We return to the place within yourself, and we all have it, even though the vicissitudes of life and the challenges of life make it difficult for us to perceive and to touch. On Shabbat is a time to return to that inner place of perfection, that inner place of calmness that exists within us. Next one is indulge with sanctity. When we say indulge with sanctity, we spoke about that. That's what Kedusha is. Yes, it is a time to indulge. And if for 6 days of your week you desisted properly from letting your hearts run wild, your heart's desires run wild, if you practice Shabbos properly, you can indulge. You must indulge, but you should do that through the context of sanctity. Sanctity means, again, to be fully present in the pleasure that you're doing. It means to infuse it with something special. Holiness doesn't mean something that I don't even know the definition of. Holiness means something very practical. It means sanctity. It means that I take something mundane and I make it special. I make it unique. I connect with it on the level that says this is more than just an external pleasure experience. It's something meaningful. And I appreciate that God gave me ice cream and rib steaks and prime rib, my favorite food. So if you want to invite me over for dinner, that's what I like, prime ribs. That's what is to sanctify. That means to connect it, to elevate it through appreciating what it is that you're doing. It's not some kind of real heebie-jeebie, fuzzy type of word, holiness. It's a real awareness and presence and a complete and dedicated connection to what you're doing. And by doing that, you are elevating it to being holy. Finally, song, and we don't have time to discuss all the aspects of song. Instead, I'd like to close out the webinar with a song which is based on it's based on a psalm. I forgot which number. I think it was here on my slide, but I don't remember the number. It's one of the Psalms of David. And this is a psalm which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. And it really, many have the custom to sing this song at all three of the Shabbat meals, the traditional Shabbat meals. It's a song that sort of, on some level, encompasses our unique and special relationship with Hashem. And I will close out the webinar with singing this psalm in one of many tunes. This is the one that I usually sing. And please, if you know the tune, please sing along. Mizmor leDavid, Hashem roi lo echad, Dino desher yargitzeni, Amenu chodnalei, Nafshi yeshover, Yahancheni, Yahancheni, B'maglei tzedek no'im Shemo, Tamchielech B'gei salmozeh, Lo yikara Ki ato imadi, Shifecha Yishavadecha, Shifecha Yishavadecha, Heimo Yinachamuli, Taro Lefonai Shulchan, Taro Lefonai Shulchan, Taro Lefonai Shulchan, Haydi Yishanto Hashem Roshi, Yishanto Hashem Roshi, Haydi Yishanto Hashem Roshi, Toisi Vaya. V'shavti b'beit Hashem, V'shavti b'beit Hashem, Yoelech Yomim. Everybody, lai, 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 ya, la, lai, lai, lai. Thank you very much. And I just want to extend a welcome and an invitation. The next time you're visiting Israel, please give me a call. I would love to have you a guest at my Shabbat table and to try together to experience true Minuchat Shabbat. And I'll take any questions. Anybody want to chat in now? And you can first try to address. It's just about now 8 o'clock. It's already 8:02, 8:03 here, which means that we're sort of out of time. This is being recorded, so anybody who wants to review it, certainly they will be able to do that. So if there's any questions or comments, please chat in now, and I will address them. Stay on for another 5 minutes or so. You're all speechless. We don't give away the menu, Cam. Never. Yes, certainly you can email me with questions or comments later. I know we kind of covered a lot, and I apologize for that. But certainly I wanted to give you some good food for thought, literally and figuratively, and please make the effort to review some of what we've learned, try to practice some of what we've studied together, and be in touch with me certainly with any comments. Okay. Is everybody, is the audio working properly for everybody? Just make a check. I hope nobody got lost. It doesn't look like there was any technical problems. Jeff, want to come back online, or everything seems to be running smoothly?
Yes, thank you, Avi, for the webinar. I don't see any other questions, but you can certainly email Avi if you have any questions at any point. And thank you all for joining us. We do have another membership webinar, which is on April 13th with Alan at 8 p.m. So that we'll be getting plenty of notification for that. And we have our other webinar series, free webinar series that we're running that continue with Rabbi Misa Berger tomorrow night. So thank you, Avi, and thanks everybody for being on.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And Alan, okay. Thank you. Good night, everybody, or good afternoon.
Okay, I'll stay on for another minute or two if there's anybody. Again, if something private or, again, email is always the best way to reach me. I'm generally pretty good with responding, but my mother-in-law just showed up, so things are kind of busy around here, as they seem to always be in my life. Okay, good. Thank you again. Finally, good afternoon, good morning, whatever it is in your time zone. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening, and I wish you only the best. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.